Well, first of all, Larry, it's an honor to have you here. Your writings on democracy have really shaped my own understanding of democracy, particularly in the Middle East. I wanted to pick up on a point that you raised in your lecture about Tunisia. I agree with you that Tunisia is a model. I think it's a huge success story. But if we're going to take Tunisia's transition to democracy as a success story for the rest of the Arab Islamic world, that implies a lot of issues that are counterintuitive to an American audience and to many modernization theorists. Because if Tunisia post Ben Ali is a model, that would suggest and imply that Ennahda, the Muslim Brotherhood, has to play or should play a leading role in the transition to democracy. And for many people unfamiliar with the Arab world, unfamiliar with the role of religion in democracy, that strikes them as a bit odd and almost incomprehensible. How would you explain those tensions?
I don't think that's the lesson from Tunisia. I think there's a more general lesson, which may often have that as an element of the story. But the general lesson is that these societies have very serious divisions. They may be along the fault line of secular versus at least moderately Islamist political tendencies or ideologies. They may be along regional and sectarian fault lines that Tunisia generally doesn't have. But whatever the fault lines, people need to negotiate. And they need to create a positive sum game rather than a zero sum game. They need to be willing to compromise, and they need to craft rules of the game by which everybody underutilizes their potential power so they can forge a political pact on the rules of the game and a somewhat inclusive political future in which everybody can have a stake. I think that's the more general lesson of Tunisia. It's one that at least has been partially absorbed with the National Dialogue Framework Agreement that emerged in Yemen. And often it will mean that an Islamist-oriented party will have a leading role. Elsewhere it might mean something else, but that's the more general lesson.
Interesting. Let's shift next door to Libya. You didn't talk about Libya in your lecture. Could you assess the prospects for democracy in Libya post-Assad? I mean, the general picture, it's chaotic, and most people are depressed. I was wondering what your sort of assessment is of Libya, the challenge.
The core challenge in Libya is to create a state. You can't have a democratic state unless you have a state. You can't have a state unless it has a monopoly over the means of violence. That means that the militias must be disarmed or integrated into a national army and police force. And until that can happen, or a Libyan state can acquire sufficient strength to make it happen, there's no hope of democracy in Libya. It's just kind of political pluralism swirling around very powerful militias that are laws unto themselves. That is the overriding challenge in Libya today, and I think the Libyan government certainly needs a lot of security assistance from the West, but it also has to try and find a political formula to achieve what I just articulated.
And could you just say a bit more about Yemen in terms of why you think that there's sort of, you said it's semi-possible, sort of a story to celebrate in the context of the Arab Spring?
You had a very polarized situation, and still have, between North and South in Yemen. There was a danger of the South, and still is, of the South seceding again. There's a danger of civil war. There's been a Houthi rebellion in the North. There's just a very complex array of regional, linguistic, and sectarian divisions in Yemen that need to be sorted out. It can only be done through the negotiation of a broad political agreement that distributes political power and national resources in a very far-reaching and inclusive way. They don't yet have a constitution, but in the National Dialogue Conference that was going on last year, 2013, they did ultimately reach an interim agreement on some basic principles that will guide the negotiation and writing of a new constitution. And I think this is a huge step forward. If they can arrive at a federal system with substantial devolution and really, in a way, special privileges and resources and guarantees for the South, but that everybody signs on to, they may achieve, what many people thought was impossible, which is a peaceful agreement to hold the country together within a framework of electoral competition and political pluralism that may not be perfect democracy, but will certainly be better and more accountable and more just than what reigned in Yemen under Abdullah Saleh.
Great. Larry, I have 1,000 more questions, but you have another meeting to go to, so thank you for being with us.
Thanks
Appreciate
very
it.
much.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.